Whispers in Willow Creek. Dusty Rivers leaned against the weathered rail of the livery, the mingled smells of hay and horses a familiar balm. Willow Creek was awash in the amber light of the fading sun, long shadows stretching across the street. But the vibrant scene couldn't soothe the knot in his stomach. These last days, the Golden Nugget Saloon had been a hive of disquieting activity. Unfamiliar faces, hard-edged and hungry, haunted its doorway at all hours. Whispers of shady deals, fragments of coded jargon, prickled his skin. This was no ordinary boomtown buzz. A darker purpose simmered beneath the surface. At first, he'd chalked it up to greenhorns chasing silver fever up north. Then he'd seen Clemens. Sheriff Clemens, a landmark in Willow Creek, a man who'd always projected a homespun brand of frontier justice. Stern, perhaps, with a fondness for the bottle, but decent at his core. Lately, though, a flinty edge had hardened his gaze, a telltale tick tugged at his mouth. Dusty watched as Clemens emerged from the saloon's rear, face florid, voice sharp with suppressed ire. He was locked in a heated exchange with a man whose slicked-back hair and reptilian smile set Dusty's teeth on edge. The man, draped in a city suit that looked offensively out of place on the dusty street, made a sharp, insistent gesture. Though the words were lost to the wind, the intent wasn't. A demand laced with menace. Clemens' shoulders sagged, his usual swagger extinguished. He looked utterly beaten. Dusty pushed off the rail, the crunch of gravel under his boots announcing his advance, desperate to snag a snippet of their discourse. But the breeze carried their voices away, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of unresolved conflict. Finally, Clemens wheeled around and trudged toward his office, the snake-like man tracking him with a predatory glint. That evening, the Nugget was a pressure cooker of smoke and clinking chips. Nursing a weak whiskey at a shadowed table, Dusty's eyes patrolled the room. He wasn't there for recreation. He was observing. The snake reappeared, holding court at a central table, ringed by the same unsavory characters Dusty had marked earlier. Their expressions were grim, their tones hushed and conspiratorial. An atmosphere of taut expectation filled the saloon, like a drawn bowstring. Abandoning his drink, Dusty drifted toward the back, feigning a need for the privy. Rounding the corner, a glint of reflected light caught his eye near a stack of discarded barrels. He crouched, his fingers closing on a small, rectangular slip. A gambling chit issued by the Golden Nugget. The name etched across the top was undeniable: Clemens. The sum owed was astronomical: $500. A king's ransom, far exceeding what Clemens earned in half a year. A shiver of dread snaked through Dusty. He knew the sheriff enjoyed a hand of cards, but $500? That kind of debt could drown a man. He folded the chit and tucked it into his vest. Straightening, voices drifted from the back door. He flattened himself against the wall, straining to listen. "The girl arrives tomorrow," the snake hissed, his voice oily. "Ensure everything is prepared. Our associates are anticipating her." "Clemens is getting skittish," a gravelly, unfamiliar voice countered. "He's starting to ask questions. Clemens is in too deep to turn back now. Remind him of his debt. Remind him of the consequences of noncompliance." A chill deeper than the mountain snows settled on Dusty's bones. The girl? What girl? And what did Clemens' debt have to do with it? He needed no further confirmation. He melted away from the back of the saloon, his mind reeling. Clemens had a daughter, Sarah, a tender, innocent girl barely past childhood. A primal urge to protect her surged through him. He walked back to the livery, his steps leaden. The sunset blazed with the hues of a forge, but he scarcely registered the display. A terrible premonition settled upon him. Something unspeakable was about to happen in Willow Creek, with Sheriff Clemens at its epicenter. He had to uncover the truth. He had to shield Sarah, and he had to confront Clemens, even if it meant shattering the remnants of his respect for the man. The whispers that haunted Willow Creek had crescendoed into a deafening roar, and Dusty Rivers knew he could no longer stand idly by. A daughter's sorrow. The afternoon sun beat down on Harmony Gulch, baking the dusty street. Dusty Rivers leaned against the rail outside the livery, the scent of hay and horse sweat thick in the air. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach, a cold counterpoint to the heat. He hadn't slept well, the snippets of conversation from a golden nugget replaying in his mind. Clemens, the girl, a deal. It all swirled into a toxic brew of suspicion. He saw Clemens emerge from the sheriff's office, his shoulders slumped, his usual swagger replaced with a weary slump. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, and Dusty suspected that weight was a mountain of debt. Clemens paused, staring at the ground, then started toward his house on the edge of town. Dusty pushed himself off the rail and followed, keeping his distance. He found Clemens behind the house, pacing near a small patch of sunflowers. Lily, Clemens' daughter, was tending them, her movements listless. She usually radiated a quiet joy when working in her garden, but today her shoulders were hunched, her face hidden behind a curtain of brown hair. Dusty hung back, close enough to hear, but obscured by the corner of the barn. "Lily," Clemens' voice was rough, strained. "We need to talk." Lily didn't look up. "About what, Pa?" "More disappointments." Clemens sighed, a sound that spoke of defeat. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm doing what I have to do." "And what is that, Pa?" "Selling the farm? Letting those men take everything." Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "It's a deal, Lily. A good deal. It will solve all our problems." Clem's voice rose, cracking with a mixture of desperation and anger. "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me? By what?" "Giving me away." Lily finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Is that it, Pa? Is that how you're going to protect me?" Dusty's blood ran cold. He gripped the rough wood of the barn, his knuckles white. Clemens ran a hand through his thinning hair. "It's not like that, Lily. Mr. Harding is a respected businessman. He's wealthy, Lily. He could give you a life I can't." "Wealth? Is that all you care about?" "I don't want wealth, Pa. I want a life here. I want to open my flower shop. Remember? The one we talked about for years." Clemens turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "Those dreams they're not realistic, Lily. Not anymore." Dusty felt a surge of protectiveness for the young woman. He'd seen her kindness, her quiet strength. The thought of her being forced into a life she didn't want by a desperate, selfish father made his gut clench. "He wants to meet you, Lily," Clemens continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Just meet him. Have dinner. That's all I ask." Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Pa. I won't. I won't be sold off like some prize cow." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Clemens reached out, as if to touch her, but hesitated, his hand hovering in the air. He dropped it to his side, defeated. "Just think about it, Lily. Please." He turned and walked back toward the house, his shoulders slumped even further. Lily remained in the garden, her sobs echoing in the still air. The sunflowers, usually vibrant and cheerful, seemed to droop in sympathy. Dusty watched her, his heart heavy. He knew he couldn't stand by and let this happen. He had to do something, anything, to protect Lily from her father's desperation and the clutches of whoever this Mr. Harding was. He pushed himself away from the barn, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had a sheriff's daughter to save, and time was running out. The gilded cage, the morning light, usually a welcome companion, felt like a judging eye as it pierced the stable's aged planks. Dusty Rivers was running on empty. Clemens' subdued confession from the previous night resonated in his skull, each syllable a blow to his weary spirit. Hours he'd wasted pacing, grappling with the overheard exchange, its implications coiling in his belly like a venomous serpent. He hadn't yet faced Lily. A cold dread gripped his insides. He fought the urge to panic, to leap to the worst conclusions. Perhaps Clemens had reconsidered. Maybe. He froze, rounding the stable corner, air seizing in his lungs. The Clemens back door stood slightly open, revealing a tableau within. Clemens, face a rigid mask of resolve, clutched a dress, a vibrant, emerald splash jarring against the backdrop of the humble, weathered room. Lily stood before him, shoulders bowed, her normally sparkling eyes dulled by a heartache that chilled Dusty to the core. "Put it on, Lily." Clement's voice, stripped of its usual booming confidence, was raw. It was the sound of a man cornered, a man broken. Lily shook her head, the refusal a bare breath. "Papa, I don't want to. Please, tell me why I have to wear something like this. It's not who I am." The dress seemed to ripple as Clemens pushed it toward her. "Don't argue, girl. Just do as I've asked." His hands, normally rock steady, betrayed him with a subtle tremor as he adjusted the fabric. A wave of raw fury surged through Dusty, threatening to overwhelm him. He yearned to charge through the doorway, to snatch the garment from Clemens' grasp and spirit Lily away. Yet, something restrained him. He needed the full picture, the complete understanding of Clemens' scheme. "Papa, please," Lily's voice fractured. "I want to open my flower shop, remember? All the seeds we planted, the window boxes we planned to build. This has nothing to do with that." She reached out, her fingers recoiling from the shimmering material as if it carried a toxin. "He scares me, Papa." Clemens recoiled, his gaze flitting from his daughter's imploring eyes. He raked a hand through his thinning hair, a sudden weariness carving lines into his face, aging him years in mere seconds. "Lily, you just don't understand. This is for the best. For all of us. For the best." Lily's voice gained volume, a thread of rebellion threading through her fear. "How can it be for the best if I'm miserable? If you're miserable?" Clemens seized her shoulders, his grip firm, bordering on painful. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think this is tearing me apart? But I have no choice. I made errors in judgment, Lily, grave ones, and this is the only remedy." He released her abruptly, turning away, his shoulders once more slumping. The room was saturated with silence, heavy with unspoken words and dashed hopes. Lily fixed on her father's turned back, her face a canvas of hurt and confusion. Dusty watched, his heart aching in sympathy. He saw the ember of hope flickering in her gaze, struggling against the encroaching shadows. He registered the desperation etched into Clemens' bearing, the weight of his failures buckling him. Lily offered a hesitant hand towards her father, but he remained turned away. Instead, he mumbled something indecipherable, something that might have been an apology or perhaps a justification for his actions. Then, with a final, resigned exhalation, Clemens exited the house, leaving Lily standing solitary in the dim interior, the emerald green dress gathered tightly in her hands. Dusty's fists tightened involuntarily. He knew then, with a conviction that settled deep within his soul, that inaction was no longer an option. He couldn't allow Clemens to barter away his daughter's happiness for some illusory reward. He had to intervene. He had to shield Lily, even at his own peril. He wheeled and headed towards the stable, his mind alight with possibilities, plans coalescing like an approaching storm. He was simply one man, a wanderer haunted by his past, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would not allow Lily to be sold off. He wouldn't permit her spirit to be snuffed out. A cowboy's choice. Dusty found Clemens nursing a whiskey at the far end of the Longhorn Saloon. The man sat hunched over, his wide shoulders slumped like a broken gate. The usual gleam was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dull, haunted flicker. Even the star on his chest looked tarnished. Dusty pulled up a chair. "Sheriff." Clemens didn't look up. "Rivers, what do you want?" His voice was raspy, like he'd been gargling gravel. "I want to know what's going on with Lily." Clemens finally raised his head, his gaze unfocused for a moment before snapping into a semblance of his usual hard stare. "Nothing's going on. She's my daughter. She looked scared tonight, Clem. And that dress." Dusty let the sentence hang, the unspoken accusation heavy in the air. "That wasn't Lily. You were trying to make her into something she's not." Clemens slammed his glass on the table, the whiskey sloshing over the rim. "You got no right to talk to me like that. I'm her father. I know what's best for her. Best for her, or best for you." Dusty leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you in trouble, Clem? Deep trouble?" Clemens's face flushed a mottled red. "Get out of here, Rivers. You're drunk. I saw the way you looked at her, Clem. like you were sending her to the gallows. What kind of debt are you trying to pay off with your own daughter? Clemens stood abruptly, towering over Dusty. The smell of cheap whiskey and desperation rolled off him in waves. You listen to me, Rivers. You don't know anything. You keep your nose out of my business, or you'll regret it. Understand. Dusty didn't flinch. He met Clemens's gaze head-on, seeing the fear that simmered beneath the bluster. This wasn't the Clemens he knew. This was a man cornered, a man willing to do anything to escape. I understand that you're a desperate man, Clem, a man who's lost his way, but I won't let you hurt Lily. Clemens's hand tightened into a fist. You think you can stop me? I'm the law in this town. Not anymore, you're not. Dusty stood, mirroring Clemens's posture. Whatever hold they have on you, it's turned you into something ugly. And I won't stand by and watch you sell your daughter into hell. Clemens spat on the floor. Get out. Dusty turned and walked away, the sheriff's venomous glare burning into his back. He knew he'd crossed a line. There was no turning back now. Clemens wouldn't let this go. He'd come after Dusty, and he'd use every ounce of power he had. Back out on the dusty street, the cool night air hit Dusty's face. The sound of crickets chirping felt like a mocking chorus. He couldn't go to the authorities. Clemens was the authority. And whoever Clemens was indebted to clearly had a reach that extended beyond the town limits. He walked towards the livery, his mind racing. He needed to get Lily out of redemption. Tonight, he couldn't risk waiting another day. Every tick of the clock felt like a step closer to some unknown horror. He saddled his Mustang, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just about protecting Lily anymore. It was about saving her. Saving her from a father who was supposed to love her, from a system that was supposed to protect her. He rode toward Lily's house, the silhouette of the mountains a jagged promise against the starlit sky. He didn't have a plan, not a real one, just a burning conviction and a desperate hope that he could reach her in time. He knew he was risking everything, his freedom, his reputation, maybe even his life. But as he pictured Lily's terrified eyes, he knew he had no choice. He was a cowboy, and this was his choice. Escape under the moon. The moon, a solitary beacon in a vast, obsidian sea, cast the only light Dusty dared trust. He moved with the fluidity of smoke, hugging the perimeter of the Clemens estate, the parched grasses rustling softly under his worn leather. The house slumbered, save for a hairline fracture of light leaking from under what had to be Lily's door. He prayed she was ready, that his arrival wasn't a breath too late. Reaching the rose trellis beneath her window, the blooms exhaled a sweet, heady fragrance, briefly eclipsing the scent of dust and horseflesh clinging to him. He scaled the aged wood, calluses grating for purchase. The roses, beautiful as they were, raked his skin, leaving fiery red welts. He tapped, a delicate code, against the glass. Once, twice. Silence stretched, then a faint stirring from within. The light vanished. With a protesting groan, the window yielded. Lily's face, bleached pale by the moonlight, held a stark tableau of apprehension and hope. The sparkle usually dancing in her eyes was muted, replaced by deep shadows of worry. She wore a plain calico dress, clutching a small satchel. Dusty, she whispered, a mere breath of sound. I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I promised, he replied, his voice a low rumble. Ready to go? A slight tremor touched her chin as she nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. He reached for her, his strong hands spanning her waist. Easy now, slowly. He lowered her, the satchel thudding softly against him. She weighed almost nothing, a delicate fledgling he was determined to shield. Setting her gently down, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she breathed, her eyes locking with his. Gratitude can wait, he urged, already moving. We need to run. They slipped like phantoms towards the stables. Dusty had already prepared 2 horses, a solid bay mare for Lily and his own trusty Palomino, Goldie. The animals shuffled nervously, sensing the charged atmosphere. Ever ridden much? He asked, his gaze sweeping the darkness. A little, when I was a girl, she offered, a ghost of a smile flitting across her lips. "Papa hasn't allowed me near one in years." He assisted her onto the mare, adjusting the stirrups to her diminutive size. "Hold tight," he instructed, handing her the reins. "And trust me." Mounting Goldie, the familiar heft of the saddle was a small comfort. He cast one final glance at the house, a darkened form against the luminous night. A wave of sorrow washed over him, a pang for the life Lily was abandoning. But time was a luxury they couldn't afford. They had to vanish. He nudged Goldie forward, Lily's mare falling neatly into step. They moved at a quick trot, leaving the Clemens Ranch and the small town of Willow Creek, receding into the distance. The steady cadence of hooves against the earth was the only sound, a rhythmic pulse marking their flight. As they rode, the tight knot of fear in Lily's expression began to loosen, replaced by a nascent spark of hope. She straightened in the saddle, her grip on the reins firm. The wind streamed through her hair, carrying the sharp, clean scent of sage and pine. "Where are we headed?" she asked, her voice growing stronger with each stride. "Somewhere safe," Dusty answered, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Somewhere your father can't follow." He offered no further explanation, unwilling to amplify her apprehension. He knew Clemens wouldn't simply let them disappear. He'd hunt them and unleash the hounds of hell in his pursuit. But that hell wouldn't touch Lily. They rode for what felt like an eternity, the moon their unwavering sentinel. The landscape became a blur, a shifting panorama of deep shadows and shimmering starlight. As dawn began to etch the eastern sky with streaks of rose and gold, Dusty guided them into a narrow canyon, its towering walls offering a sanctuary of stone. Dismounting, he helped Lily to the ground. Her legs wobbled, her face was pale with exhaustion, but a new resolve shone in her eyes. "We need rest," he said, his voice raspy with weariness. "Then, we need a plan." He led the horses to a trickling stream, allowing them to drink their fill. He then spread a blanket in the protective shadow of a giant cottonwood. Lily collapsed onto it, her eyes fluttering shut. "Thank you, Dusty," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. He sat beside her, watching as the first rays of sun brushed her face. She appeared fragile, yet resilient, like a desert bloom defying the harshness of the land. He knew in that moment he would fight for her, not just against her father's wrath, but against any darkness the world might throw her way. He was all she had left. And she, he understood with a sudden, startling clarity, was rapidly becoming his everything. Refuge in the mountains. The pre-dawn air bit at Lily's exposed skin, raising gooseflesh despite the borrowed wool coat Dusty had given her. Each breath puffed out in a small white cloud as they crested the final ridge. Below, nestled in a small clearing beside a rushing creek, sat a cabin. Its roof sagged in places, and the logs were weathered gray, but smoke didn't curl from the chimney. It was, for the moment, sanctuary. "Think it's safe?" Lily asked, her voice tight with exhaustion. Dusty scanned the perimeter, his hand never straying far from the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. "Abandoned for years, judging by the looks of it. But we won't take chances." They approached cautiously, Dusty leading the way. The door creaked open with a protesting groan, revealing a single room filled with dust and the scent of decaying wood. A rusted wood-burning stove sat in one corner, and a rickety table and 2 chairs stood near the window. Cobwebs draped like ghostly shrouds from the rafters. "Home sweet home," Dusty said, his voice laced with a wry humor that didn't quite reach his eyes. He set down the meager provisions he'd managed to grab from the Clemens pantry, a loaf of bread, some dried meat, and a water skin. Lily coughed, waving a hand in front of her face. "It needs work. We'll make it work." He began clearing the dust from the table, his movements efficient. "First, we need a fire. Then we see about patching up those holes in the roof before the next rain." As Dusty gathered firewood, Lily began sweeping the floor with a makeshift broom fashioned from a pine branch. Despite the grime and the weariness etched on her face, there was a spark of determination in her eyes. She wasn't the fragile flower her father seemed to think she was. Soon, a crackling fire chased away the chill, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of burning wood mingled with the musty odor of the cabin, creating a strange, comforting aroma. They ate their meager meal in silence, the only sound the crackling fire and the rushing creek outside. After they had eaten, Dusty pulled out a tattered map. "We need to decide where we're going." Lily leaned closer, studying the faded lines. "Anywhere is better than where we were." "True enough, but we need a plan. Somewhere your father won't think to look." He traced a route with his finger. "There's a small town north of here called Redemption. It's a long shot, but far enough away, and nobody knows me there." Redemption. Lily repeated the name, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Sounds promising." As the fire burned lower, casting long shadows, they began to talk. Dusty spoke of his life drifting from ranch to ranch, working cattle and breaking horses. He spoke of the vast, unforgiving landscape he called home, the constant struggle for survival, and the quiet satisfaction of honest labor. He didn't mention the darker parts of his past, the gunfights and the losses that haunted his dreams. Lily, in turn, spoke of her sheltered life in the Clemens mansion, a gilded cage where she felt more like a possession than a person. She talked about her love for flowers, how she would spend hours tending her small garden, finding solace in their delicate beauty. "I always dreamed of opening my own flower shop," she confessed, her voice soft. "A place where people could come and find a little bit of beauty in their lives." Dusty watched her, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. He saw not the sheriff's daughter, but a woman with dreams and aspirations, a woman who deserved a chance at happiness, a woman who he was starting to care about deeply. "Maybe someday you will," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Redemption might need a flower shop." Lily laughed, the sound light and melodic in the small cabin. "Maybe it does." The laughter faded, replaced by a comfortable silence. The fire crackled, and the wind howled softly outside, rattling the loose panes of glass in the window. The refuge in the mountains for this one night felt like it could be a home. The hunter and the hunted. Sheriff Clemens sat hunched over the scarred oak desk in his office, the midday sun doing little to dispel the gloom clinging to him. The usual bravado, the booming laughter, all seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind a shell of man. He stared at the wanted poster bearing Dusty Rivers' face, a fresh one printed just that morning. Below it, scribbled in his own unsteady hand, were the words, "Armed and dangerous. Aiding and abetting fugitive, Lily Clemens." He hadn't slept properly in days. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face, filled with a mixture of fear and betrayal. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but the men he owed, they weren't the forgiving type. A knock, hesitant and almost apologetic, sounded on the door. "Come in," Clem muttered, his voice raspy. Deputy Miller shuffled in, removing his hat. "Sheriff, that fella you wanted to see is here." Clem took a deep breath. "Send him in." The deputy nodded and disappeared. A moment later, a figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. He stepped inside, and the office seemed to shrink under his presence. Snake-Eye Johnson. Johnson was a bounty hunter of grim repute. His eyes, cold and reptilian, seemed to miss nothing. A network of scars crisscrossed his weathered face, each a testament to a life lived on the edge of a knife. He wore a duster that looked as if it had absorbed the dust and grit of 1,000 deserts, and 2 revolvers hung low on his hips, worn smooth from constant use. "Sheriff," Johnson acknowledged, his voice a low growl. "Johnson," Clem replied, offering a curt nod. "I need you to find someone." He pushed the wanted poster across the desk. Johnson picked it up, his gaze lingering on Lily's name. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "Rivers and a girl," Clem said, his voice heavy. "They can't have gotten far. I need them brought back. Alive." The last word was a strangled whisper. Johnson pocketed the poster. "Alive complicates things, but it can be arranged." "Payment." Clem named a figure, a sum that made his stomach churn. He was mortgaging the town, his soul, everything he had left. Johnson considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll need something to get me started. Clem reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, embroidered handkerchief. Belongs to Lily. Found it in the cabin they were holed up in. Johnson took the handkerchief, holding it to his nose. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, as if drawing in the very essence of his prey. They're heading west, towards redemption. Not fast. They think they're covering their tracks, but they're not. He turned and walked out, leaving Clemens alone in the suffocating silence of his office. Clem felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He'd unleashed a force he might not be able to control. Miles away, nestled in a small clearing, Dusty was teaching Lily how to handle a rifle. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. "All right, Lily," Dusty said, his voice patient. "Hold it steady. Keep your eye on the target." Lily's hands trembled as she raised the rifle, the weight of it surprising her. She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them, focusing on a gnarled tree trunk about 50 yards away. "Easy now," Dusty said, placing his hand over hers, guiding her grip. "Breath in, breath out. Squeeze the trigger gently." A loud crack echoed through the clearing as the rifle fired. The bullet missed the tree by a wide margin. Lily lowered the rifle, her face flushed. "I can't do it, Dusty. I'm no good at this." "Everyone's no good at first," Dusty said, a reassuring smile on his face. "It takes practice. This isn't about becoming a gunslinger, Lily. It's about being able to protect yourself." He showed her again, demonstrating the stance, the breathing, the controlled squeeze of the trigger. They practiced for hours, until Lily's shoulder ached and her fingers were numb. Slowly, she began to improve, her shots getting closer to the target. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Dusty leaned against a tree, watching Lily. She was reloading the rifle, her movements now more confident, more fluid. "Why redemption, Dusty?" she asked without looking up. "It's a fresh start, Lily. A place where we can be ourselves, away from all this." Lily fired another shot, this one hitting the tree trunk dead center. She lowered the rifle, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. "Maybe I can learn to like this." Dusty chuckled. "Maybe you can, but let's hope you never have to use it." Unbeknownst to them, a pair of cold, reptilian eyes watched from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Snake-Eyed Johnson knelt in the dirt, examining the tracks around their campsite. He picked up a fallen petal, crushed and faded, and held it to his nose. Flowers. The girl. He knew where they were going. Redemption was a long way off. Canyon of secrets. The parched earth, cracked and chalky under the sun's brutal gaze, betrayed them with a sudden precipice. Dusty hauled back on Buck's reins, the abrupt drop catching him off guard. The ground fell away, revealing a chasm of verdant life against the ochre landscape. A silver thread of water cascaded down the cliff face, a shimmering curtain in the stark light. "Dusty," Lily breathed, her voice hushed with awe. They dismounted, securing the horses to a gnarled juniper clinging to the rim. The air shifted, growing cool and redolent with damp soil and the sweet perfume of unfamiliar wildflowers. A slender, twisting trail beckoned into the depths. Dusty led the way, testing each step, Lily shadowing him closely. The canyon floor proved a hidden sanctuary. Delicate fronds unfurled from moss-laden stones. Butterflies, jewels of amethyst and ruby, flitted through fractured sunlight. The waterfall's thunder rebounded off the canyon's embrace, a steady, tranquil drone. Lily, her laughter ringing, raced ahead to the pool at the waterfall's base, drinking with cupped hands. "It's like stepping into a dream," she whispered, turning to Dusty, her face alight. He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "It is." A lightness bloomed within him, a sensation absent since he'd learned of Clement's pact with the devil. The afternoon dissolved into exploration. Lily skipped flat stones across the pool, the resulting ripples distorting the reflections of the towering bluffs. Dusty deciphered the tracks in the yielding earth, revealing the stories left by deer and rabbits, teaching her the wilderness tongue. He identified edible flora, cautioning her against the treacherous ones. She listened intently, absorbing his expertise. As the sun commenced its descent, bathing the cliffs in strokes of coral and violet, they rested on a smooth boulder, sharing dried meat and foraged berries. Lily nestled against Dusty's shoulder, her hair grazing his cheek. "Thank you," she murmured, "for rescuing me, for revealing all this." He drew her closer, sensing the warmth of her presence. In her gaze, he saw a question he couldn't name. Gratefulness? Tenderness? Something deeper? He leaned in, drawn by an irresistible force. He knew the dangers, the foolishness of it. But here, in this oasis of beauty, resistance crumbled. A rifle crack cleaved the peaceful hush. A projectile whipped past Dusty's ear, spitting rock fragments from behind. "Down!" he roared, shoving Lily to the ground. Another shot echoed. The waterfall's cadence was obliterated by the percussive barrage of gunfire. Dusty groped for his rifle, his pulse frantic. The sharp, precise reports marked a Winchester. Snake-Eye Johnson. A quick, perilous glance revealed Johnson poised on the canyon edge, a stark silhouette against the dying light, his rifle a deadly extension of his arm. His movements were fluid and predatory. "Can you get to your rifle?" Dusty shouted, hugging the ground. "Yes," she answered, her voice a tremor. Dusty unleashed a withering volley, rounds impacting against the rocks above. Lily crawled toward her rifle, her fingers clumsy with fear. "I can't work the lever," she cried, panic rising. Dusty knew they were exposed. Johnson possessed the advantage of height, trapping them below. Action was vital. "Lily, listen," he said, his voice a steadying force. "I'm going to draw his attention. Make for that rock cluster over there." He indicated a small formation a few yards away. "Once you're safe, cover me. Understand?" She nodded, her eyes wide pools of terror. "Good girl," Dusty said, squeezing her hand. "Go!" He inhaled deeply, rose, and sprayed a barrage of shots toward the canyon rim. Johnson vanished behind a boulder, allowing Lily to scramble toward safety. Dusty followed, diving behind a different outcropping as a storm of bullets tore apart the space he'd just occupied. The battle was joined, and a chilling certainty gripped Dusty. Only one of them would escape this canyon alive. Desert Crossroads. Dusty gasped, his hand clamped over the gash blooming crimson on his side. Snake-Eye's bullet had found its mark, a searing line of fire that threatened to consume him. Lily, her face a mask of terror, helped him stumble back into the shadowed embrace of the canyon walls. The echo of Snake-Eye's frustrated roar bounced off the sandstone, a promise of relentless pursuit. "We have to move," Dusty rasped, his voice strained. "He won't give up." Lily's eyes, wide and glistening, darted around, assessing their escape route. "But you're hurt," she protested, her voice trembling. "I'll be fine. Just need to keep moving." He knew it was a lie, but the truth would only paralyze them both. He leaned heavily on her, the desert floor a shifting obstacle beneath his boots. They pressed onward, leaving the oasis behind, the vibrant green fading into the monochrome landscape of the desert. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air thick and heavy. Each breath was a struggle for Dusty, his vision blurring at the edges. After what felt like an eternity, Lily stopped abruptly. "There," she whispered, pointing towards a barely discernible trail winding through the rocks. "A Kiowa hunting path. They might be able to help." Hope flickered within Dusty, a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness. He nodded, and they followed the trail, their pace agonizingly slow. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but offering no respite from the heat. Dusty stumbled, collapsing against a rock, his strength finally giving way. "Dusty!" Lily cried, kneeling beside him, her touch gentle and urgent. "Go on," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Save yourself." Lily shook her head fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I won't leave you." She scanned the surrounding landscape, her gaze sharp and focused. Dusty watched, his breath shallow, as she crawled towards a cluster of dry, thorny bushes. He expected her to seek shelter, but instead, she began carefully examining the plants, her fingers tracing the leaves, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, she let out a small cry of triumph. "Here!" she exclaimed, returning to him with a handful of thick, succulent leaves. "Prickly pear. It holds water." She crushed the leaves between two stones, extracting a viscous liquid. She pressed it to his lips, urging him to drink. The taste was bitter and slightly sour, but the moisture was life-giving, revitalizing him with each swallow. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice regaining some strength. "My grandmother. She taught me things," Lily said, her voice soft. "Things city folk forget." The Kiowa hunting path led them to a small, hidden canyon, where a handful of dwellings nestled beneath towering cliffs. The scent of wood smoke hung in the air. Dogs barked, alerting the inhabitants to their arrival. Several warriors emerged, their faces stoic and wary. Lily stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "We are travelers," she said, her voice clear and respectful. "We seek shelter and healing." The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them, an older man with weathered features and eyes that held the wisdom of generations, stepped forward. He studied them for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. "You are wounded," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Come, we will see what we can do." They were led to a small, dimly lit dwelling, where a woman with gentle hands and knowing eyes examined Dusty's wound. She cleansed it with a herbal solution and stitched it closed with practiced ease. As Dusty lay resting, Lily sat beside him, her hand clasped in his. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my life." Lily smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that chased away the shadows of fear. "We saved each other," she corrected. As the sun rose, painting the desert in a vibrant tapestry of light, Dusty knew that their journey was far from over. Snake Eye was still out there, and the sheriff's long arm stretched across the land. But in the heart of the desert, they had found something precious, a shared strength, a growing love, and the unwavering will to survive. He also realized that Lily was much more than he thought, a survivor. Justice in Willow Creek. Willow Creek was a mere blip on the map, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings stubbornly clinging to the ghost of a creek long since claimed by the arid landscape. Dusty, his arm throbbing a persistent ache despite Lily's care, reined in the horses before the general store. "Supplies," he stated, his voice a dry rasp, "and perhaps a whisper of news." Lily affirmed with a nod, her fingers instinctively brushing the grip of the Colt Peacemaker sheathed at her hip. The weapon's weight, once alien, now felt almost comforting against her skin. Dusty had patiently tutored her in its use, emphasizing not only the mechanics of loading and aiming, but also the profound weight of taking a life. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of planed wood, dried legumes, and a faint medicinal tang. A lean man with perpetually narrowed eyes, the proprietor, assessed them with shrewd suspicion before offering a grudging nod. Dusty gathered the essentials: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, his gaze darting to the window every few seconds. Lily, drawn to a small packet of wildflower seeds, envisioned a vibrant splash of color against the monotonous brown. "Heard tell Sheriff Clemens is hunting for a pair of outlaws," the storekeeper drawled, his gaze sharp. "Risky business, crossing him." Dusty met his stare, unfazed. "We fear no lawmen." "Perhaps you should," the storekeeper muttered as he tallied their purchase. Outside, the sun beat down with unforgiving intensity. The only other structure that offered even a hint of refuge was the saloon, its batwings listlessly swaying in the paltry breeze. "Let's grab a drink," Dusty suggested, his eyes sweeping the deserted street, "and maybe glean some useful information." The interior of the saloon was murky and carried the reek of stale beer and broken dreams. A lone pianist hammered out a dolorous tune in a shadowed corner, his face a mask of long suffering. Several patrons, equally weary, listlessly nursed their drinks. Dusty and Lily settled at a table in the rear, Dusty strategically positioning himself with a view of the entrance. They had barely tasted their drinks when the batwing doors crashed inward. Sheriff Clemens stood framed in the doorway, his face a granite mask of grief fueled by rage. Beside him lurked Snake Eye, his scarred face contorted in a malevolent leer, his hand close to his revolver. Dusty Rivers, Clemens' voice rumbled, a guttural threat. You believed you could evade me? Lily's fingers tightened on her peacemaker beneath the table. Dusty placed his hand over hers, a silent reassurance. Clemens, Dusty replied, his voice measured. This doesn't need to end this way. It ends with you paying for your sins, or worse, Clemens bit out. Debts made by you are not my problem, Clemens, Dusty spoke. And Lily is not yours to treat so poorly. Snake Eye surged forward, drawing his weapon. Dusty acted with lightning speed, appending the table and drawing his own revolver in one seamless motion. The saloon exploded in a cacophony of chaos. Shouts, overturned chairs, shattering glass. Dusty fired, the bullet sinking home in Snake Eye's shoulder. The bounty hunter stumbled backward, clutching his wound. Clemens charged, his face a grotesque mask of fury. Dusty sidestepped the clumsy attack, disarming Clemens with a sharp kick. The sheriff fell heavily, his gun clattering uselessly across the floor. Dusty stood over him, his revolver leveled at Clemens' head. Lily watched, her pulse hammering in her ears. She'd never witnessed Dusty so implacable, so dangerous. You could have chosen a better path, Clemens, Dusty said, his voice dangerously soft. You could have shielded your daughter. Clemens gazed up at Dusty, his eyes a desolate landscape of hatred and defeat. I saw no other choice. Dusty lowered his gun. There's always a different way. He holstered his revolver. I'm leaving you here, Clemens, to live with the consequences of your choices. He turned to Lily, his expression softening. Let's ride. They mounted their horses and left Willow Creek behind, leaving Sheriff Clemens to drown in his despair. As they rode, Lily glanced back at the fading town, a feeling of closure settling over her. She was shedding her old life, abandoning the shadows and the secrets. Where next? She asked, turning toward Dusty. Dusty smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his eyes. Redemption. And then, wherever the winds take us. Lily drew closer to him, her hand finding his arm. I've been considering, she began, her voice gentle. That flower shop. Perhaps in redemption. Dusty chuckled warmly. A flower shop in redemption. That's quite a notion, Lily. They rode onward, the setting sun painting the vast sky with vibrant hues of amber and lavender. The desert stretched before them, an endless expanse, but for the first time, Lily felt a surge of optimism. She had a future now, a future entwined with Dusty. A future brimming with the promise of wildflowers and the hope of absolution. She squeezed Dusty's arm. We can make this work.